Hello and welcome to AFAL Podcasts, the home of objective, up-to-date and independent reporting on Turkey. Don't forget to follow our reports through social media, on afalnews.com or through our mobile app. Let's get started.
Hello and welcome to Talking Turkey. I'm your host, AFAL editor David Lepeska, and with me today is Kristian Brakel, Istanbul head of Berlin-based think tank, the Heinrich Böll Foundation. Thank you for joining us, Kristian.
Hi, it's a pleasure, David.
We are talking on Wednesday, January 8th, just as Turkish President Erdoğan and Russian President Putin are launching the Turk Stream pipeline in Istanbul and discussing their country's involvement in the conflicts in Syria and Libya. Going back to last year, Turkey's purchase of Russian S-400 missile systems had many analysts arguing that Ankara had turned away from NATO and the U.S. and the West and embraced Moscow. And this meeting seems yet another sign of that. I wonder, what do you think? How might Europe and the U.S. pull Ankara away from Moscow? Are sanctions a potential solution?
I'm not sure that there is really a pulling Turkey away from a particular direction. I mean, yes, of course, if US sanctions really finally came into play, they would definitely do something to alter perceptions in Turkey a bit, because the perception so far is that there is a lot of shouting, a lot of barking, but no biting. I think the general issue is that the Turkey's alignment with NATO during the Cold War years came out of the necessities that Turkey was a border state with the Soviet Union. I mean, there were Soviet divisions stationed right beyond the border in Armenia. This logic, this has changed, at least to a certain extent. And this Cold War logic that held the alliance together, or that helped Turkey in NATO. This does just not exist anymore. And so I think what we see now, a more emboldened Turkey, a Turkey that wants to do things by itself, a Turkey that would like to switch alliances as it sees fit. That is just something that neither Brussels nor Washington or other capitals in the EU can change in the short term. Does
that mean that the U.S. and Europe and NATO should just accept a more independent Turkey and just do what it can to maintain the alliance?
No, yes, I think they have to accept a more independent Turkey. I think what would help is if both Washington, but especially the Europeans, would start better defining what they can actually get out of the alliance. Because so far Turkey has defined for itself what it wants from NATO is mainly being part of armament programs. It wants to be part of this big NATO family, also as some sort of second stage insurance against too much Russian meddling. But my feeling is that especially the Europeans have not clearly defined why they want to keep Turkey in NATO, and they have not clearly defined what kind of price this should elicit from Turkey. And as long as we're not clear what price Turkey would realistically pay and should pay, I think as long as this has not happened, there will be no positive diplomacy in this sense. But I think neither Washington nor the Europeans are in a position to really get Turkey back 100%. But of course they can get Turkey on certain points. But for that they need to clearer identify what those points are.
Last month saw renewed violence in Syria's Idlib province, about which Turkey and Russia reached a deal in 2018 to clear the area of jihadist rebels and establish security, stability. That agreement has clearly failed, and tens of thousands of people have fled the latest violence. Turkey has in recent weeks been pressing Russia to agree to a ceasefire to end attacks by the forces of President Assad. And this week, the U.S. came out in support of Turkey's efforts. Do you see Erdogan and Putin making any progress in regards to Syria and Idlib in particular?
I mean, I've not seen any statements from today's meeting yet. I think it's still going on. Yes. But I think in general, there's a possibility to have at least a short-term understanding. I mean, yes, Russia wants to keep up pressure on Turkey. Russia, at least in the long run, would like to see Assad take control of the whole country. But I think what Russia doesn't want is the total destruction of the Idlib province that would be necessary for the regime to really regain control of the area. So I think I believe what will happen with Idlib is we'll see a back and forth. We see like short-term arrangements and ebbs and flows of the fighting. Surging again, then like dying down, or not dying down, but at least receding a bit. But I think there is no real like stable solution for the situation. And I think both Russia and Turkey know that, so they just will continue to meddle through.
Some observers expect the two leaders to also possibly reach a deal in regards to Libya, where the two countries have been supporting opposing sides in the conflict, and Turkey recently committed to a military intervention to support the Tripoli-based government of national accord. I know this is not your area of expertise, but what do you expect in terms of Libya? And more particularly, what do you think Turkey is after in Libya?
I think if I look at the three topics that I've heard that the two leaders wanted to talk about today, namely Iran, Syria, or Iran, Idlib, and Libya, I think the Libya file is the one which is most likely where the two sides could come out today from the talks with at least some basic understanding. While Russia is not happy with Turkey's meddling, I think there is a certain chance that both sides could agree to a solution where Russia would come out looking like a player in setting new terms, in setting, or at least in putting both conflicting parties on a road towards renewed negotiations. And I mean, I think, yes, Russia so far has been supporting Haftar, but I think other than with Assad, from what I've seen or from what I've heard, is Russia is not like necessarily married to the idea of who should lead Libya in the end. It's more a certain idea of like having certain influence, having also some economic interests in the country, and like in the end having a certain sense of stability. So I think maybe Turkey and Russia there could find some agreement. As for Turkey, I mean, I think the main driver in the moment is really what's happening in the Eastern Mediterranean. Turkey feels shut out from other Mediterranean states, namely Greece, Egypt, Israel, in dividing Cyprus, of course, in dividing the energy resources or the potential energy resources to be found in the area. Not all of them have been discovered yet, as you know. Trying to project certain power in the Mediterranean to be a player in the area, also to prevent certain adversaries, Saudi Arabia, the Emiratis, and Egypt, of gaining too much influence in the country. And plus, I mean, we don't know, but I would assume. I think there is also at least a small ideological preference. I mean, we know that there is an Ikhwan background to the Sarraj government, and I mean, we know
Brotherhood, yes.
Yeah, sorry, yeah, and I mean, like, I think there is at least a small ideological aspect here. I don't think it's the dominating one, but I think it can't be brushed off completely.
You also mentioned Iran. Moscow has, of course, supported Assad, which is close to Iran. And Turkey has tried to kind of sit in the middle of these rising tensions between the U.S. and Iran after the assassination of Qasem Soleimani. What do you think Erdogan and Putin will discuss in regards to Iran?
I mean, it's a mystery what exactly we'll discuss, or a mystery, unfortunately, to me. But I think we will not see like much coming out of these talks. I think both sides will probably confirm each other that neither one is interested in a major escalation in the Middle East in the moment. I mean, Russia is too busy building on its gains, mainly in Syria, stabilizing its newfound position in the region. And I mean, as you know, with Turkey and Iran, it has always been a complicated relationship, but there is a relationship. And I mean, as we know, the relationship also with the Americans is not especially warm and friendly in the moment. So while Turkey definitely would not like to be seen to be on the side of the Iranians, and probably doesn't feel that way, I would say they at least feel some ambiguity over Iran's role. Now, on the one hand, they see themselves as rivals in the region. Then, on the other hand, there is quite a good deal of trade going on. There is also this Iran's role in countering the Saudis, with whom the Turks, as we know, are also not on very friendly terms in the moment. So I think both are mainly interested in not to further escalate the situation. But like I don't see very concrete steps happening, except for, I mean, yes, there will be diplomacy. We just heard this morning that Çavuşoğlu is planning to go to Tehran soon. I think it's next week, or this week already. But yeah, I wouldn't expect any like very concrete outcomes from these talks.
You mentioned the Eastern Mediterranean. Much of Turkey's relations with Russia are based on energy security, as Moscow is Turkey's main supplier of energy. To address that concern, Turkey has been aggressively pushing its claims in the Eastern Mediterranean, where significant deposits of natural gas have been found and where Cyprus, Greece, and Israel last week agreed to build a major pipeline to Europe. The European Union sanctioned Turkey last year for its drilling operations off the coast of Cyprus, and many Western observers have derided Turkey's recent maritime border deal with Libya as extra-legal, as non-binding. What more do you think might Greece, the EU, and the international community do to address Turkey's aggressive stance in the Eastern Mediterranean?
Look, I think this situation is relatively complicated for the EU because, I mean, let's face it. Yes, of course, Turkey's like warship diplomacy, or whatever you want to call it, what they're doing in front of Cyprus, also this like, I don't know, ridiculous new delineating of continental influence shelves in the Mediterranean are of course not in line with international law. But on the other hand, I mean, the course that the Greeks and also other of the countries like Cyprus are driving is not particular wise, I would say, and also especially with the unresolved Cyprus conflict, even though this is just one of the aspects, not the only one, is also not particularly fair when it comes to the distribution of natural resources in the Mediterranean. I mean, what's currently happening through Cyprus and especially through Greece is that these countries are dragging the rest of the EU, probably with some support of, or at least tacit support of the Italians and maybe the French, into a conflict where not all EU member states would like to be. I mean, as it's the EU, of course, EU member states will always show more solidarity with other member states than they will with outsiders like Turkey, especially when Turkey's foreign policy, Turkey's diplomacy has not been very good in building bridges with other countries.
And Cyprus is a member state of the EU.
Cyprus is a member state. And I mean, like, the unresolved conflict is something that's very hard to tackle for the EU, as it is within EU borders, and not and like one of the main players is a government the government of Cyprus that actually sits at the table. What I was saying is that there will always be more solidarity. That there is a need for support, whether they like it or not, from EU member states to another EU member state, as Cyprus is one. But on the other hand, there are countries such as Germany which are not very happy that they're getting dragged into this quagmire by Greece and by Cyprus, where they don't want necessarily see the cause as 100% helpful, or they don't. I mean, nobody supports the Turkish way of things. But that doesn't mean that necessarily everybody agrees on what the Greeks.
You were saying they will support their fellow EU member, but
yes. So what I was saying, like EU member states can't. I mean, this is part of the structure of the EU. So no member state can get out of this corset. They have to support or show solidarity to the Cypriots, whether they like it or not. But there are member states, Germany is one of them, who don't like the course that the Greeks and the Cypriots are currently pushing. So there is a lot of uneasiness currently, and there's a lot of uneasiness for when it comes to sanctions and these things. So, like, the steps that we've seen that the EU has taken last year in regards to Turkey and the Turkish drilling, I don't believe that I think many member states would be happy if it would stay at this, and if it would not further escalate. So I don't see a further escalation just now, but that doesn't mean that. I mean, there could be some automatism given how the EU works, and depending on what Turkey is planning to further do in the area. But I would assume
if Cyprus and Greece kind of want to start to escalate this a bit, there might be some division within EU member states about joining that.
Yes.
Okay. The Eastern Mediterranean is just one of the issues eroding ties between Turkey and Germany. The two have also clashed in regards to Turkish politicians campaigning in Germany. Hundreds of Turkish imams working in Germany and essentially overseen by the Turkish government. And Ankar's claim that some 10,000 terrorists are able to live freely in Germany, which is a reference to followers of Fethullah Gulen, whom Turkey accuses of masterminding a failed coup in 2016, and Kurdish separatist links to the PKK. I wonder if you think German-Turkish relations, and maybe Turkey-EU relations as well, are now at rock bottom, and what chance do you see for improvement in 2020?
No, I don't think they're at rock bottom. I mean, they were at rock bottom at 2017. They have since improved. They're still not good. But you can also see, even if you just follow what's publicly said between the governments, I would say the tone has become much less hysterical. And on both sides, but especially on the Turkish side, you see far less public statements made by Turkish officials.
Well, but they have been saying that, threatening to unleash the gates and let all these refugees go, and that Europe hasn't been holding up its part of the bargain in terms of the refugee deal.
Yeah, this is like a broken record. We've been hearing that since years, and it always comes because negotiations are up for the third tranche of the money for the deal. there are a lot of issues that are a bit unclear. So every time this happens, Ankara tunes up the rhetoric a bit. But I think it's a far distance from like all these, I don't know, Merkel is Hitler comparisons that we had in 2017. And like where Erdogan really directly targeted not only German politicians, but if you remember, for example, the case of Dennis Yücel, this German journalist who was imprisoned for over a year in Turkey. We have a different situation now. We have like many of the, for example, the political cases of people, of German nationals have been released from jail, at least the high profile ones. We still have, there's still a good deal of people in jail in Turkey, or they are at least under judicial control and not allowed to leave the country. But like the numbers are far less than they were at a certain time in 2017, 2018. So I think both governments have found back to at least a level where they talk to each other and where both sides are trying not to rock the boat too much. That doesn't mean that the relationship is good. And it doesn't mean that the relationship is improving, because I mean, like, the issues that were at the root of the disagreement, those are still there. I mean, Turkey is still charting a very authoritarian course domestically. It still has some like very unclear foreign policy issues ahead of it. And of course, I mean, like the things that the Turkish government is referring to in Germany with like all these terrorists running around, all these cases, I mean, not much has changed. I mean, the German government has clamped down a bit, or German security agencies have clamped down a bit on PKK operatives in Germany. We just had a major arrest last week, for example. But I mean, all in all, the legal situation in Germany has not changed. So like people who have no criminal record or nothing to prove, or nothing can be proven against them, will of course eventually go free again, or to only receive minor sentences if it's only like a minor infraction of the law. And of course, it's not enough, and especially when it comes to the Gülen movement. I mean, the majority of people who are with the movement in Germany are, of course, people who have no criminal record whatsoever. That doesn't mean that the organization is free of blame, but it still makes it very hard to sentence individuals if they have not committed a crime in Germany.
Speaking of rocking the boat, exiled Turkish journalist Can Dündar wrote an article for the Washington Post last month detailing how Turkey might be plotting to assassinate dissidents abroad, pointing to Germany as the most likely place because of the presence of so many supposed enemies of Turkey. I then spoke to a German analyst who confirmed a growing sense within German security circles that MIT, Turkish intelligence agency, might soon weaponize its local partners. He pointed to Turkish biker gangs in Germany to mount some sort of attack, and he added that this wouldn't be the first time that it happened in the previous decades. What is your take on all this? Would Turkey dare to attempt an assassination or some sort of attack within Germany?
Listen, that's I mean, like, I'm not really in a position to say that. I mean, what we have seen in the past, of course, is, I mean, we know that there are MIT operatives in Germany. There was a very prominent case of a guy, I think, who was set to eliminate a PKK operative in, I think, Bremen a few years ago, who had to stand trial in Germany. We also know there is this case of what's his name, Dennis Nahki, the football player who at least reported, I think it was 2017, that somebody shot at his car, which I think the case was never solved and nothing came out of it. I think it's not completely. It's not that it's completely impossible that such a thing could happen. And I mean, we've seen other countries such as Russia ramping up assassinations abroad, including in Germany.
We just saw the U.S. assassinate Soleimani.
Yeah, different method, but yes. Yeah, of course. I mean, it's not like that these things are unheard of.
Erdogan would potentially have that to point to, you know?
Yeah. I mean, there is still a different. I mean, like, it might not sound very fair, but of course, it's a different thing if you assassinate someone if you're Russia or the US, or if you assassinate someone if you're Turkey. I mean, the balance of power is just a bit different, no? So the consequences might be as well. But I mean, if you look, for example, at the Russian-led assassination in Berlin recently, I mean, the consequences for Russia have not been that grave so far. So maybe Turkey is thinking, the consequences for them would be bearable likewise. But I'm not sure about that, because I mean, like, while the topic of Russia, or like the relationship to Russia, is something that is much more debated within German society and German politics, and how German politicians should deal with this relationship. I mean, I think like there's almost no politician in Germany and almost no one in the German public, except some like AKP supporters, who would not be in favor of being tough on Turkey. So I think that might be different. So I think, yes, it's a possibility, but I'm still not sure if Turkey would risk doing it, at least in the moment. But then again, to really judge that, I think you need to be more privy to information that only Turkish security services probably have.
Mm-hmm. Well, lastly, let's do a bit of Turkish domestic politics. A major issue gripping Istanbul these days is the canal proposed by Erdogan, running parallel to the Bosporus Strait from the Black Sea to the Marmara Sea. Critics contend that it will cause extensive and irreversible environmental damage, and more than 100,000 locals have expressed their distaste for the plan. Erdogan has said it will go forward regardless. Why do you think Erdogan is so gung-ho about the canal? Does it offer, or would it potentially offer significant economic benefits, or is it just a play for real estate and construction revenues, as critics say?
I mean, yeah, I think both. No, it would probably offer revenue for the Turkish government, in a sense that, because as far as I know, like, passing through the Bosphorus is free, or at least you only pay for navigation, or navigational aid. But so I mean, they could then just charge people to go through to go through this Kanal Istanbul. And the other part is, of course, real estate. I mean, from what we've heard or we've seen, is like they've already sold big chunks of the real estate next to the future canal. And I assume that some of the buyers would be really, really angry if they suddenly found out that their new bought land is just that. It's like just in the middle of nowhere with no waterfront view. I think that's the thing. And then I think the last part I would see as also part of like the usual Erdogan posturing narrative is like, we promise that we're going to do it, and we're going to do it, you will see. I mean, does it really always make sense? No. I mean, like, same with, I mean, the whole Taksim Square redesign. Yeah, I mean, yes, okay, the mosque made sense maybe from a symbolic point of view for the Islamists, but I mean, Gezi Park, for example, I mean, you could have easily de-escalated this thing, and many in the AKP said so at a certain time, but he didn't want to. Or, I mean, take the Atatürk Kulturmerkezi. Was it really necessary to really tear it down like completely instead of like renovating it and making it more modern? He's just not the guy for compromises, and especially when it comes to these quotation marks crazy projects, as he always calls them. So I think there is a certain vision, and there is a certain vision of grandeur, also certain aspects of megalomania.
So if you had to place a bet right now, you would say that the canal is going to be built?
I think if it's not going to be built, then it's due to economic reasons, because like it doesn't work, or if there's really such a massive if like enough Istanbulis, including those with an AKP background, oppose it, then it might not. But yeah.
Well, Istanbul Mayor Ekrem Imamoglu has proposed a referendum on the canal, which is a direct challenge to Erdogan. Yeah. And since his landslide victory in June, many have pegged him, Imamoglu, as the likeliest national challenger to Erdogan. Do you agree with that assessment?
Yes, definitely. I mean, whenever you speak with him, he always says, "No, we concentrate on the problems of Istanbul." But I think, there is a clear understanding that he is the most likely challenger in 3 years or 3.5 years. Doesn't mean that he has a chance. Very hard to say because, it's Turkey, so there's so much that can happen in these 3.5 years. But of course, for him, it's also a wise move if he really runs a referendum, and it comes out as a big no to the canal. Then he has managed to beat Erdogan a third time already.
Jesus, really? Fuck.
Yeah, but will it happen? I don't know. There's a big, they're pushing it hard at the moment. There's a big conference on the Kanal Istanbul on Friday with the EBB.
You said, sorry, you dropped out for a bit. You said if he really wants a referendum.
If he really runs a referendum, and if he really managed to get a big no to the canal, then he would have beaten Erdogan for a third time. So politically, it's a clever move.
Speaking of other challengers, former Prime Minister and former leading AKP figure Ahmet Davutoglu finally launched Turkey's newest opposition party, the Future Party, last month, and former economic czar Ali Babacan is expected to launch his party in the coming weeks. How do you see the prospects of these new parties? Are they legitimate contenders or more just signs of trouble within Erdogan's AKP?
Can't there be both? I don't know. It's I have to admit, I'm always a bit reserved when it comes to these new parties because you might remember all these what was said before E-Party was launched. That everybody was very hopeful and saying they're going to draw these conservative votes over, and then the AKP will drop to 30%. And then in the end, it didn't happen that much. No, they mainly managed to split votes of both MHP and JHP. So I'm not quite sure. At least I wouldn't count too much on Davutoglu, but Babacan, I think yes, he has a certain standing. But will he or will either of them be able to really get the needed votes in an election? I'm not sure about that because I think also, it depends very much on the circumstances. And as we all know, the circumstances currently are not very good. So that the average voter, not the well-educated or the middle-class educated in Istanbul or Ankara, actually hear of these parties and actually get to know what's on offer. For example, in rural Anatolia, are relatively slim, or at least for them to really have a proper campaign. These chances are slim. Maybe I think at the best of circumstances, these parties would manage to peel away, something between 5 and 10% from the AKP, and that might already be enough. I think the more interesting part would be if these new parties manage to get many of the current AKP MPs to join them. I'm not quite sure. I think the current coalition has, 30 or 39 seats, 30 or 39 seats majority. So there are not many MPs that they would need to change sides to actually alter majority conditions in parliament. So that could be interesting.
As you mentioned, Turkey is not slated to hold another election until late 2023. Yet several respected observers have suggested that Erdogan might soon call early elections due to economic troubles, and in part because of something you point out, that these emerging new parties would not have the chance to develop their platforms and get their word out all the way to remote Anatolia. Do you see that early elections as a real possibility, and how might they play out?
Well, it's Turkey, so early elections are always a possibility, I'd say. You can never rule that out. I would say from a tactical point of view, Erdogan would currently be unwise to call for early elections unless he really lost his majority in parliament. But if he lost his majority, then the question is how he would regain that through elections.
But why unwise? I mean, you don't think that giving these new parties more time to develop themselves and get the word out has a greater chance of eroding Erdogan's support?
Maybe. But then again, if you assume, I don't know, I've not seen any new. The last poll I saw, and that was only for Babacan, I think it was in November, and it was still relatively marginal, and it was not like how people being asked if they would vote for him, but people being asked if they think, in regards to him, if they think a new party made sense or was necessary. And I think I remember that, interestingly, a lot of JP supporters, a lot of HDP supporters said, yes, a new party would make sense. A lot of EE party supporters said that. But funnily enough, not many AKP supporters wanted a new party. And I mean, these are the people who are important. So yes, you're right. I mean, maybe like destroying them early on, or just showing early on that they don't have any success at the ballot box, would make sense for Erdogan. But then on the other hand, if he assumes that they will not be able to garner the support that they need anyway, neither in the short nor in the long term, then with all the current economic outlook and still a certain recovering from the defeat in the municipal elections, then I think it would rather be unwise to go to the polls right now.
Okay, I think.
But it's all. I mean, like, this is just all like looking into my crystal ball. I've no idea. This is. I think it's Turkey. We just have to contend with a situation where early elections are always a possibility.
Indeed. Kristian Brakel of the Heinrich Böll Foundation, thank you so much for your time and insight.
Thank you for asking me.